stop them?
Well, we can't get enough volume with the horns. The brass is always weak here.
Are you short of brass or something?
We're always short of brass.
We've got 2 horns here tonight.
Two
what
horns.
else have you got?
That's all we have. That's all we have. We'll probably have a trumpet and a half for Sunday.
What, borrowed or actually members of the orchestra?
No, actually members of the orchestra, but not here tonight. But the trumpeter is a school teacher, and we can only get him occasionally. But there's always a crying need for brass here.
Well, how many people have you got in the orchestra altogether?
45 to 50.
And what would you like to have?
Well, we'd like to have about 70.
That's
we've got good strings, but weak on cellos, but mostly the brass is the trouble.
What's the possibility of finding 70 orchestra standard players in Newcastle?
Eventually we'll get them. We started with about 15 a few years ago. It's building up all the time, and of course we train a lot of our students at the Conservatorium. There again we have a floating population. School teachers leave the district and all that.
Do you have to train in cramped conditions like this?
Yes. This is the best we have in town. We have been in the Winter Garden, but it's very uncomfortable and the acoustics are shocking. We get about 3 echoes. This is the best we have.
And where do you get the opportunity to play?
Well, we do regular concerts at the City Hall. We're doing one on Sunday, of course. And we have travelled to Cessnock, various places. But we do at least 3 concerts a year. And then with a part-time orchestra, that's as much as you can expect, really, on 2 hours a week rehearsal.
Okay, well, look, we'll let you get on with the rehearsal.
Okay. Start again.
Mr. Overfleet, how long have you been playing clarinet?
Oboe, you mean?
Well, oboe in this case.
16 months. 16 months since March last year.
Is that all?
That's all, yes.
I thought it was supposedly a difficult instrument to play.
Well, I have been playing a recorder for a few years before that. And I would say it is very difficult because I'm far from satisfied with the performance, but I'll hope to get better in it in the long
How
run.
long have you been with the orchestra?
Well, about the same time. I mean, I had to have a few months, of course, to get used to the instrument.
You learn it here at the con?
I learned here at the con. I borrowed this instrument, as a matter of fact, from the council. It belongs to the Newcastle City Council. I don't know how old the instrument is, but sometime or another I hope to get my own instrument.
And have you
$500 when I can save it up.
Have you long had a sort of ambition to play in an orchestra?
Yes, I have always enjoyed the oboe very much in the Matthew Passion, which was frequently performed in Holland. And when I came here, the first one, that was one of the first things I missed here, the performance of the Matthew Passion. And when it was performed here in Newcastle, I believe they asked an oboe player from Sydney to come here. And that's when I got the idea of learning it myself, in order to give Newcastle an oboe player.
How long have you been on the violin?
I've been learning ever since I was 5, that's 14 years.
And how long with the orchestra?
I started this year.
What is this? You've just come down from your sort of home in Singleton to...
Well, I'm at the Teachers College and Conservatorium here doing a music course, high school music teaching.
What did you do with the violin for the other 13 years?
Well, I've been competing at a Stedford's and grade work and for charity work around Singleton.
Was it your brother's example in the Sydney Symphony that inspired you to come in here, or did you always want to play in a symphony orchestra?
Oh, I've always wanted to have music as my life.
How long have you been playing the piano, Helen?
Since I was 6 years old, which makes it 14 years.
But this is your first opportunity to play with a symphony orchestra?
Oh yes, I come from the country.
Where?
Gloucester?
You learned in Gloucester?
Yes.
So, orchestral playing's not beyond anybody from anywhere?
I wouldn't say so.
You find it a bit exciting?
Very exciting. Looking forward to it.
Have you been always a pianist, or have you played something else as well?
Always a pianist, but I have had a go at playing the violin and a bit of guitar.
And you hope that this sort of thing happens a lot more often, I imagine.
Well, I'd say I'd have the opportunity now and then here in Newcastle.
Tell me, Keith, does the name sort of dream merchant trouble you at all?
No.
You feel that you're satisfying people's dreams, or are you?
This is our prime purpose, to satisfy people's dreams. Travel to many people is a dream. We endeavour to make it come alive.
Shipping companies these days make no pretense to being still in the transportation business, then?
No, we do take a lot of people, of course, from A to B, but we take those people who want more than just to get from A to B in as quick a fashion as they can. People who want to see a few places, who want to do it in comfort, and who don't want to be living out of a suitcase.
Well, presumably cruises are the outstanding example of dreams satisfied. Are there many return customers?
The return customers of cruises, I'm glad to say, is just growing year by year. When we talk about repeat business, we regard them as repeating in the last 2 or 3 years, and this has grown to about 35%.
Pretty big business.
Yes, it's big business. In fact, about 49,000 people will cruise with us next year.
Well, there are plenty of people who have dreams of cruising. You know, when they win the lottery, they want to go on a world cruise, but most of them are far too timid ever to do it. How do you break down this sort of timidity?
Well, it's very important too, because we're all a little bit frightened about the unknown. First of all, in our promotional activities, in our advertising, we've got to show them that we're in the business of putting pleasure and service into their holidays. Secondly, of course, when they do buy and they go on board, these people have got to be looked after by our hostesses to see that they are really getting the service and the attention, and they don't feel lonely, and they don't have any fears about whether they should do this or shouldn't do that.
The lap of luxury.
The lap of luxury.
So, although posh has gone out of P&O and any other passenger carrying service for that matter, it's still posh in the way of service.
Service is our business. We have a crewman for every 2.5 passengers. And I believe that this is one of the basic features of our continued success.
Well, this is pretty good commercial for yourself and other shipping lines, but it brings us to another thing. More and more people are travelling on cruises. More and more money is going with them from the Hunter Valley and other places. What is your company, and others for that matter, doing to return a bit of that to Australia? Is there any attempt to bring tourists here?
I think this is a good question because, firstly, travel is a two-way stretch. People go away and obviously people come back. Our own company, for example, brings people in from many parts of the world, the United Kingdom, the States, South Africa. When they arrive in this country, they have a choice of many things to do. We believe that it's primarily the responsibility of the local areas, the local regions, to attract them.
Before we get on to the local regions, could your company honestly say that you're doing as much to promote Australia in London or Johannesburg or New York as you are to promote those places right here in Australia?
Oh yes, oh yes. We in fact have a very extensive program with the Australian Tourist Commission in all those countries, subscribing to their advertising funds and encouraging people naturally to take our services to Australia.
Oh, obviously, you want them to travel on your service, but Australia is in fact being promoted in this way.
Oh, very much so.
Well, once you get them to Sydney, what promotion is there for the Hunter Valley? It's our neck of the woods.
Well, this, of course, is the duty of the Australian National Travel Association, in the first instance, to coordinate the activities of various areas. The activities of this area's region, this area's tourist organisation, is to bring them to the Hunter Valley.
Well, being a perfectly blunt question, have you seen any publicity material for the Hunter Valley?
Well, not a great deal.
Mr. Fife, whenever legislation is pending, of course, it creates some confusion in the minds of the people who are likely to be affected, and we might as well make this position quite clear right now. Why did the government introduce these amendments, or think about introducing them?
Well, there's been a tremendous increase in demand for Australian coal. This is the first reason. In 1949, for example, our total coal production in New South Wales was 10.4 million tonnes. Now, this production reached a level of 35 million tonnes last year, and I anticipate that by 1980 we'll be mining about 80 million tonnes in this state. Now, it's necessary for the government to release some of the areas that have been held in reserve for many years. Now, as a prerequisite to the release of some of the reserve areas, we feel it's necessary to alter the Mining Act in relation to coal. For example, to indicate the depth of our problem or the extent of our problem, we have approximately 700 applications from approximately 50 applicants for a very small area in the Muswellbrook, Denman, Singleton district. Well, now it's impossible to deal with these conflicting applications that conflict in both time and area under the provisions of the existing legislation.
Well, now, to clarify the position as it's going to be, let's look at it as it was. Let's assume that someone has 300 or 400 acres of land in this area, and they either want to mine coal themselves, prospect for it, or let it out to somebody else to mine it. What was the procedure in the past?
Well, I'm assuming that you're referring to land that has private coal beneath it.
Surely.
Well, now, in the case of private coal, in the past, arrangements could be made or contracts entered into between private owners of coal and mining companies. Permission would then be obtained from the Joint Coal Board to open a mine, and the project would get underway. Now, this is assuming that there was sufficient private coal to make a viable colliery activity. But one of the problems that confront us and confronts private owners is that the private owner alone hasn't sufficient coal available to constitute an economic operation, and it's necessary to add to his area some additional private coal owned by another owner or some adjoining Crown coal.
All right, now before we go any further on this matter, we'll refer back to this. What, under the new arrangement, will be the procedure?
Well, under the new arrangement, the government, through the Department of Mines, will enter areas, drill out the deposits, prove a viable colliery holding, and then invite cash bids
for the particular holding. Now, the holding may contain private coal owned by, say, several private owners, and it may contain some Crown coal. For example, we could have a situation where 60% of the coal within a colliery holding would be owned by the Crown, and the remaining 40% would be divided between 7 or 8 or 9 private owners. Now, having received a cash bid and accepted a cash bid, the proceeds would be divided between the owners in proportion to the coal owned by them.
This, of course, would depend on who makes the cash bid and who wins the lease, I should imagine.
This is so.
Now, does this presuppose that, say, a small farmer who realises in some way that he has coal under his land, by the very fact that there's got to be a cash bid, is precluded from really winning the lease?
Yes, he is precluded because he probably wouldn't have sufficient coal to win it on his own anyway. He'd need his neighbour to join with him, or perhaps his neighbours, and in most cases he'd have at least one neighbour as the Crown.
Yes. Well, would he have any property value in, say, in the past he would probably lease this or enter into some contract for a lease for this mining right? Would he have any in the future?
No, he wouldn't be able to enter into a private agreement. The arrangements would be made through the Department of Mines.
Well, obviously the need for more orderly winning of coal has been pretty obvious through New South Wales for a long time, and this looks as though it's aimed at this object.
This is so. It'll do two things. It will give us the necessary machinery to release additional areas from the existing reserves, and it will also ensure that we get maximum extraction. The Mines Inspection Act, for example, lays down that an area around the perimeter of a colliery holding must be left unmined. This is for safety reasons. Well, now, unless the boundaries of the collieries are straight, a great deal more coal is left in the ground than should be. So we're aiming to do two things. One, introduce an orderly system into the release of new areas for mining, and secondly, we're aiming at coal conservation.
Well, basically then the man who has the coal under his land, and I'm thinking of the private individual in this case, not the coal companies who are big enough to bid and win the lease, what's his protection, in fact?
Well, he has the protection of the Crown, because the Crown will be anxious to derive for itself, for its own coal, the highest possible price. Now, in doing so, it will ensure that the private owner gets the maximum return for his coal.
Well, finally, these 700 people, or up to 700 who have already applied, where do they stand in the future?
Well, I've already advised the holders of existing applications that in their own interests they should leave them with the department. But I'm afraid that the majority of them will be refused. But the legislation has not been passed by Parliament. It will not be introduced until later this year, and all of the policy decisions that will flow from this legislation have not been made. So we're in a transitional period. So my strong advice to those many individuals and companies who have lodged applications is to leave them with the department at this time. But I would forecast that a great majority of them will ultimately be refused when the new system swings into operation.
Well, now, I recognise that the location of an airport in Gosford-Wyong is a very critical matter to Gosford. It's also a critical matter to Sydney. I think what one has to understand is that apart from the very specific operational requirements of a major airport, the cost of building an airport doesn't run into millions, it doesn't run into tens of millions. In fact, it's counted in hundreds of millions. And so that you can see with this sort of investment, you've got to be very, very careful about your final choice. Now, what's been happening was that originally, in discussion and investigation with the Department of Civil Aviation, we reached a conclusion that we, being the State Planning Authority, that there were two possible prima facie locations that would work. One in the Gosford-Wyong area, or more particularly in the Wyong area, of which there were several possible sites, and one in the Windsor area where the defence people are at present. And this is one reason why we put forward a proposal for the airport in Wyong. Since that time, the federal government has set up an interdepartmental committee to go further into the question and reach a final recommendation on the location of the airport.
At this stage then, though, it can be assumed that New South Wales, as represented by you, favours this Wyong or Warnervale site.
It can be assumed that the authorities, state planning authorities' recommendation was very firmly in favour of north of the Hawkesbury. Not only because this happened to be one of the few operational locations, but also because it would support very, very strongly the other recommendation, which was to try and settle up to 500,000 people in the Gosford-Wyong area, which has all the advantages for living which most people seem to want.
Now, this matter of your prediction of settling 500,000 people in this area, this will bring enormous problems, surely.
Of course, to build what is in effect the equivalent of Perth in a very short space of time, was 20 years, is not an awful long time in city building, brings a lot of problems. But you have to face these problems anyway. You have to face the investment in communications, in services, and all these other things for the growth of Sydney in any event. What matters is whether you spend the money in the place where it's likely to best, in the long run, suit the people of Sydney and the people who are going to come.
Does this mean that you would in effect restrict the size of Sydney?
This is in fact the proposition to put 500,000 people north of the Hawkesbury is basically a recommendation not to allow the current trends of growth for Sydney to continue. And on top of that, in fact, the Sydney Region Plan recommends to the government that it takes effective steps to try and steer at least another 500,000 people in addition right away from the Sydney region altogether. That's 1 million out of about 2.75 million population expansion which is expected.
Well, you must foresee then an almost non-stop urban area from Newcastle through to south of Sydney, I suppose, almost.
Indeed not. No, indeed not. I think at first sight you'd think that would be so, but in fact when you look at the actual space which is used for large populations, it is surprising how you can settle, provided you organise it and plan it carefully, in the countryside without having a fundamental impact on the whole of a conurbation. For example, in London, which has 12 million people within a sphere of 30 miles, which is the population of Australia, you can go 20 miles out of London and you wouldn't know that London was there.
There are three reasons. One is that it's on the coast and has all the characteristic coastal climatic features, in other words temperature reversions, it's subject to fogs and things like that, and therefore I don't think it's such a good site from an airport as, say, an inland site. Secondly, that it, I think, through its noise and ancillary industries and things that must develop in association with an airport, will preempt a large section of coastal and water resources from what I would regard as a more demanding public use. Thirdly, that if it does develop, it will really take up the whole of the capacity of the Sydney-Newcastle Expressway in the traffic that the airport itself will generate. So my view is that it's not the best site.
Well, what are better sites, do you think?
Well, I've got two possible sites. One is behind Newcastle in the Hunter Valley, without being any more specific than this, I would say the advantages of this are that it would do a great deal to boost Newcastle's economic base, which at the present time is virtually stagnant. Newcastle isn't growing, isn't expanding at the rate it ought to be for a major city in Australia. Every other city is expanding, not Newcastle. And it needs an injection of something like an airport into its economic base to really sort of revitalise it. That's one reason, and there's a reason for putting it there. Another location, which I think would probably be better, would be, say, in the area of Mittagong, on the south side of metropolitan Sydney, where it would serve Sydney, it would serve Wollongong, it would serve Jarvis Bay, it could at a pinch serve Canberra as well. It would be on the plateau as opposed to being in the valleys, and would be a much better climatic location for an airport.
Coming back to the Central Coast, you even object to the concept of moving another 500,000 people into the Gosford area.
Not necessarily that as a concept, because I'm not quite sure just exactly what the capacity of the area is in terms of population, but I would be concerned mainly to ensure that the Central Coast remains as a playground area for the expanding population of what I regard as the Central Coast, which is the Central Coast from Jarvis Bay to Port Stephens. And that is going to be a major urbanised area with a population of 7 million at least by 2014, 15 million by 2030. And they need an awful amount of places to play in and to enjoy the coastal scenery and so on that we have.
You're not going as far as the conservationists who want to save the land untouched by human hand?
No, because I don't think this area is one for conservation in a sort of national park sense. I think it's more an area that lends itself for use, and quite intensive recreational and enjoyment use.
Well, I feel that the most important part of the scheme for the future is the Sydney-Newcastle Expressway. And in order of priority of works, the first job will be a duplicate bridge over the Hawkesbury River at Pete's Ferry. In fact, the bridge is under construction at the present time, and it is hoped that it will be in operation by Christmas 1971. It's a major structure, 2,000 feet long, and it's likely to cost about $4 million. Well then, north of that point, of course, we have the expressway already to Calgary. And beyond now, the next section we plan to do is between Arimba and Doyleson, where there are two trouble spots on the highway at present. At Wyong, where you get severe congestion, and again at Swansea, where you, as well as congestion, you have a lift span bridge, which, if it ever were to go out of action, could create rather a very serious traffic situation. And so our planning is to construct a section of the Sydney-Newcastle Expressway from Arimba to Doyleson. That'll be about 13 miles long, and that could cost about $13 million. Details of the route haven't yet finally been decided, but it seems most likely that it will be to the west of Wyong. Swansea, a design for a new structure over the entrance to Lake Macquarie is currently in progress. In fact, it's well advanced, and site borings are being taken at the present time. It will cross the entrance to Lake Macquarie closer to the heads. It's a major bridge again. It will not have a lift span. It'll be high enough to pass all shipping likely to require use of the channel.
Mr. Hatcher, there's been this new element of a proposed second international airport possibly in the Wyong area. How does this affect your department's planning?
Well, we were aware of it when we decided to look more closely at a route for the expressway west of Wyong, and I feel sure that the route we selected will suit an international airport if it is constructed in the Warner Vale area.
The railways generally don't do anything immediately. Now, as I said this morning, before we go into extensive operations of new services and all that sort of thing, we must first of all have a very firm intimation and confirmation of the potential that will accrue from such a source. If the Central Coast population is to expand, as we're led to believe, I can only quote what we have done in the past as the example of what we will do in the future. I quoted this morning the passenger statistics from the Gosford area to the city in 1960, in 1965 and in 1970, and the proportionate increase that we have made in the passenger service that we provide for the daily commuters from the Gosford area to the city. This has been done by means of these modern trains, double-decker, interurban, etc. And should the population continue to expand, we will meet that position in the future the same as we have met it in the past 10 years.
In other words, then, the population has to come first.
That's correct.
It's unlikely, I would imagine, that you would actually plan new lines, but rather you would improve existing facilities, would you?
That would be so. It would be most unlikely that new lines would be provided. The double tracks that run from Newcastle to Sydney are in themselves sufficient to meet the needs for many, many years to come. And I may say that it is not the railways policy to build new lines when the term is loosely used about new lines. This is a very major project, and it is not a strict departmental policy to decide, or it's not a departmental responsibility to decide whether such and such a line will be built. We have to provide a lot of information relevant to any new line, but it is a matter of government policy whether that line be built or not.
Well,
but the upward trend in an existing area of railway line, that is within our jurisdiction to supplement existing services, to increase them, to improve them, to meet the changing needs.
Specifically from here to Newcastle, we can look forward to electrification in the foreseeable future.
I think this must come. You see, at the present time, Gosford is the centre of what we call sectional working from Sydney to Newcastle. This is primarily in respect of freight trains, but it also applies in respect of passenger trains. And with electrification only as far as Gosford, we are involved in engine changing of every train that passes through the area generally. Some we run through with diesel-electric locomotives, such as the Brisbane Express, but the general run of trains involves the change of engines at Gosford. Now, the sooner that that is done away with, and we can use one type of locomotive through to Newcastle, the quicker economics will accrue to the department in our operating statistics.
That's a good question. The future of the Central Coast is assured, there's no doubt about that. At the same time, it can be argued that decentralisation away from the heart of Sydney to the outer suburbs and further still to the Central Coast is at least a step forward. But it's not true decentralisation as the country people would have it. I think we're in a cleft stick to some extent on this question, but the attitude we have taken is that there are industries that will not go beyond the total metropolitan complex. And there are industries that maybe are of state or even national significance that require land. Now, if those industries fill a gap in the state's industrial structure, then it's in the public interest that their needs be met. And in some cases, in at least 3 cases, they have been met here on the Central Coast. But these are industries that wouldn't go any further.
Correct.
And, as I say, this is relative decentralisation.
Do you take any sort of attitude at all to this proposal for a major international airport in this Central Coast region?
No, this is no direct concern to us. A possible hope for for some country centre is the development perhaps of intercontinental aircraft that will require several miles of runway, and at the same time a parallel development of
short takeoff and landing aircraft that could conceivably operate, say, from a major country base and take international passengers to the very hearts of the major cities. This would avoid the need for a major aerodrome at Wyong or anywhere else. This is a possibility. Look, I don't know. The pace of technological change is changing so quickly that it throws a lot of our ideas into the melting pot.